Stop for a moment. Do not scroll past these words, because something about the person you have been thinking about has changed, and the strange part is that you may have already felt it before you understood it. There has been a silence between you that feels different from ordinary silence, almost as if something was being hidden inside it, waiting for the right moment to rise to the surface, and what you are about to discover may change the way you remember everything that happened between you. You have asked yourself the same question more times than you want to admit. Why did you change? You wondered whether you said something wrong, whether your love became too much, whether someone else appeared, or whether the connection you felt was only something you imagined. But there is another possibility that you were never prepared to consider, and that possibility begins with 3 words you may not be ready to hear. You were replaced, but not in the way you think. Something happened behind the scenes while you were trying to understand the distance. Someone stepped into a space that once seemed reserved for you, and for a while, it looked as though they had successfully taken your place, but what you could not see was what was happening inside the person you love, because appearances can hide a battle that words never reveal. You notice the little things first. The slower replies. The missing warmth. The strange pauses. The feeling that conversations that once flowed effortlessly had suddenly become carefully measured. You began reading between the lines, searching for meaning in every message, every silence, every change in tone, and eventually you started blaming yourself for things you could not even explain. But you were not imagining the change. Something really did shift. The problem is that you saw the change from the outside, while the person you love was living through it from the inside, and those are 2 completely different stories. There was a moment when they thought they had found an easier path. Someone appeared who seemed to understand them without asking difficult questions. Someone offered attention when their heart felt empty. Someone made them feel wanted when they were struggling with their own uncertainty, and for a brief moment, they convinced themselves that moving toward that person would make everything simpler. But there was one thing they could not replace. They could replace conversations. They could replace routines. They could replace the familiar presence of your name appearing on a screen. They could even try to replace the feeling of being understood. But they could not replace what your presence awakened inside them, and that truth began to disturb them in ways they never expected. At first, they tried to ignore it. They told themselves they were moving forward. They told themselves you were part of the past. They told themselves that the new connection was better, easier, safer, and more convenient. But then something unexpected happened. They started comparing, not because you asked them to, not because you were competing, not because you were standing there trying to prove your worth. They simply began noticing the difference. The new person could give them attention, but not the same understanding. They could offer words, but not the same emotional depth. They could be present, but somehow the presence felt empty in a place where your absence felt strangely alive. And that was when the person you loved began to realize that replacing your presence was not the same as replacing your impact. You had left something behind, not a possession, not a photograph, not a message, something deeper. You had left a feeling, and feelings do not disappear simply because someone decides they should. there were nights when they reached for their phone without thinking. Their fingers moved toward your name before they remembered that things had changed. There were songs that suddenly became uncomfortable. There were places that carried memories they could not explain to anyone else. There were ordinary moments when something reminded them of you so quickly that their heart reacted before their mind could stop it, and they hated that, because they wanted to believe they had moved on. They wanted the new chapter to feel complete, but the more they tried to convince themselves, the more obvious the missing piece became. You may have thought they forgot you. They didn't. You may have thought someone else became more important. That is not the whole truth. You may have believed you were simply replaced. But the deeper truth is that they tried to replace what they still had not emotionally released. And now the consequences of that decision are beginning to surface. There is something they have not told you, something they have carried quietly, something connected to the moment they first realized that losing you was not as easy as they expected. It happened during an ordinary moment, nothing dramatic, no thunder, no warning, no cinematic scene, just a quiet moment when they were alone, and suddenly, your memory appeared, not the version of you they had been trying to forget, the real you, the way you looked when you were vulnerable, the way you listened, the way you cared about details other people ignored. The way you could make them feel seen without demanding anything in return, and for the first time, they understood why your absence felt heavier than another person's presence. That realization frightened them, because admitting that truth would mean admitting they had made a mistake, and pride can keep a person silent long after their heart has started speaking. So they stayed quiet, they watched, they waited, they wondered whether you had moved on, and somewhere inside them, a question began growing stronger every day. What if I lost the person who was actually meant to stay? They never said it aloud, but they felt it, and you may have felt something too, that strange sensation that someone was thinking about you, that sudden memory appearing for no obvious reason, that dream that left you emotional after waking, that song that seemed to arrive at exactly the wrong moment. That unexplained pull toward a person you had been trying to release. You may have dismissed these things as coincidence. But sometimes your inner world notices emotional changes before your conscious mind can explain them. And there is another layer to this story. The person who seemed to replace you may not have entered their life for the reason you assumed. That person may have been a mirror, a lesson, a temporary chapter, a way for the person you love to finally understand what they had taken for granted, because sometimes you do not understand the value of something while it is standing beside you. Sometimes distance becomes the teacher. Sometimes silence becomes the messenger, sometimes losing access to someone becomes the only way to understand how deeply that person had become part of your life, and slowly, the illusion began breaking. The new connection did not feel the way they expected. The excitement faded, the conversations became repetitive, the comfort they expected never fully arrived, and the more they tried to force themselves into happiness, the more they remembered the peace they once felt with you. That is when the comparison became impossible to ignore. They began noticing things they had overlooked before: your patience, your loyalty, your emotional strength. Even the little things you once did that they never thanked you for, and suddenly, ordinary. Memories became painful, because memories become heavier when you realize you did not appreciate them while you were living them. You might wonder why they did not come back immediately, because recognizing a mistake and having the courage to correct it are two different things. They are afraid you will reject them, afraid you will ask questions they cannot answer, afraid you will look at them differently, afraid you will say, "You had your chance." And perhaps the deepest fear is that you have changed too, because while they were trying to replace you, you were being transformed by the pain. You were learning how to stand without their attention. You were learning that love should not require you to abandon yourself. You were learning that waiting for someone does not mean putting your life on hold. You were learning that your worth does not rise and fall according to another person's choices. And this transformation is exactly what they did not expect. They thought distance would make you chase them. Instead, distance began making you stronger. They thought silence would make you desperate. Instead, silence taught you peace. They thought replacing you would make you disappear. Instead, your absence became louder than your presence had ever been. And now something is changing. Not because you are forcing it. Not because you are begging. Not because you are trying to manipulate destiny. It is changing because the truth has finally begun catching up with the choices that were made. There may come a moment when they reach out, maybe with a simple message, maybe with an unexpected question, maybe with something so ordinary that you almost miss the significance of it. Do not be surprised if the first sign is small. Sometimes the biggest emotional shifts begin with the smallest words, and when that moment comes, you may feel two emotions at once. Your heart may remember everything, but your soul may remember the pain. One part of you may want to run toward them, another part may whisper, "Wait." And that pause will matter, because you are no longer the same person who once waited desperately for an answer.